1938. A New York advertising agency receives an unusual assignment: sell more diamonds. Not by lowering the price, not by improving the stone, by convincing an entire generation that love itself has a price, and that price is measured in carbon. The word itself comes from the ancient Greek adamas, unconquerable, unbreakable. For most of history, before South Africa changed everything, diamonds really were scarce, found in tiny quantities in a handful of riverbeds in India and Brazil, reserved almost exclusively for royalty. That old scarcity was real. What happened next was not. Here's what almost nobody knows. Diamonds are not rare. They never really were. This is not the history of the diamond. This is the story of how one company convinced the world otherwise and made billions doing it. I'm Aidan Thomas, and this is Hidden History. To understand the trick, you have to go back to the 1870s, when British prospectors discovered enormous diamond deposits in South Africa. Enormous was the problem. Suddenly, there were more diamonds pulled from the earth in a few years than had been found in the previous 2,000. A handful of mine owners looked at this abundance and panicked. If diamonds became common, they would become cheap, worth little more than any other pretty stone. So in 1888, they did something remarkably direct. They merged their companies into one single entity built to control supply. They called it De Beers. The man who orchestrated the merger was a young, ruthlessly ambitious businessman named Cecil Rhodes. He understood something the smaller mine owners hadn't fully grasped. In a market with no natural scarcity, whoever controlled distribution controlled the price, permanently, as long as nobody else could sell around them. Enforcing that control meant more than just stockpiling. When independent sellers tried to move diamonds outside the system, De Beers would deliberately flood the market with similar stones at a loss, undercutting the outsider until they either collapsed or agreed to sell exclusively through the cartel. It was less a company than a private central bank for a single commodity. For decades, the strategy was simple, almost crude. De Beers didn't sell diamonds freely on the open market. It stockpiled them, released only a carefully limited number each year, and made sure no rival could sell outside its control. Scarcity wasn't discovered, scarcity was manufactured, one vault at a time. But controlling supply was only half the problem. By the 1930s, the Great Depression had crushed demand along with everything else. De Beers had warehouses full of stones and almost nobody buying. Rich supply, controlled or not, still needs a reason for people to want it. Diamond sales in America had actually been falling for years before the Depression even hit, as an entire generation quietly decided that flashy jewelry felt inappropriate, even embarrassing, during hard times. The problem wasn't just money. It was that diamonds had started to feel like exactly what they were, a luxury nobody truly needed. That's when De Beers hired the N.W. Ayer advertising agency and gave them an almost impossible brief: make people want a stone with no real utility, no industrial function for the ordinary buyer, at a price entirely set by the seller. If case files like this are your thing, subscribe. We open a new one every week. Because what Ayer built next didn't just sell a product, it rewired an entire ritual. Before this campaign, an engagement ring was a nice tradition, not a requirement. Rings were often family heirlooms, passed down, reused, sometimes not diamonds at all. Ayer's job was to make a diamond ring feel mandatory, an unspoken proof of a man's love and a woman's worth, both measured in carats. The campaign placed diamonds in the hands of Hollywood stars, arranged magazine features on royal engagements, and briefed jewelers on how to guide a nervous young man toward spending roughly a month's salary, a specific, deliberately engineered number that Ayer's own strategists tracked and adjusted for decades. And then, in 1947, a young copywriter named Frances Garrity wrote 4 words at the end of a print advertisement, almost as an afterthought: "A diamond is forever." Her supervisors nearly cut the line. It became one of the most successful advertising slogans of the 20th century. The genius of those 4 words wasn't poetry, it was strategy. If a diamond is truly forever, it should never be resold, never traded in, never enter a second-hand market that might reveal its real value. The slogan didn't just sell romance. It quietly discouraged the one thing that could have exposed the entire scheme, a resale price. Frances Garrity herself worked on the De Beers account for the next 25 years, refining a fantasy of eternal marital devotion she quietly built her entire career around. She never married. Colleagues later said she found the irony amusing rather than bitter. She had simply written the most successful line of her life, and it happened to describe a promise she never made herself. By the 1960s, the campaign had crossed borders. Ayer commissioned market research in Japan, where diamond engagement rings barely existed as a tradition. Within 20 years, the same manufactured custom that had taken root in America was standard practice there too, an entire cultural ritual, exported like a product. The 1-month salary guideline wasn't fixed either. Decades later, the campaign quietly pushed it higher. 2 months' salary became the new suggested standard, printed in jewelry store brochures as though it were simply common knowledge, not a number invented and revised by the same advertising agency that invented the tradition itself. Here's the twist almost nobody talks about. Diamonds themselves are not actually rare in the way gemstones like emeralds or the finest rubies are. Geologists have identified enormous reserves worldwide. What was rare, for most of the 20th century, was any company besides De Beers being allowed to sell them. At its peak, De Beers controlled somewhere close to 90% of the world's rough diamond trade. That kind of control isn't a market. It's a single company deciding, year by year, exactly how valuable a stone should feel, regardless of how much of it actually exists underground. The empire didn't last forever, despite the slogan. New mines opened in Russia, Canada, and Australia, outside De Beers' control, each too large and too independent to be quietly absorbed the way Rhodes had absorbed his rivals decades earlier. Synthetic lab-grown diamonds, chemically identical to mined ones under any test a jeweler could perform, entered the market and undercut prices the old cartel had spent a century protecting. The monopoly cracked. It took almost 90 years, nearly a full century of one company deciding, quarter by quarter, exactly how much of the world's supply the world was allowed to see. And the century of tight control had a darker cost too. In parts of Africa, diamonds mined outside any regulated system helped finance brutal armed conflicts, stones that came to be known bluntly as blood diamonds. The very control De Beers had built to protect its prices left a supply chain murky enough for exactly that kind of exploitation to hide inside it for years before the world took real notice. But the ritual it built didn't crack with it. Today, most people still believe an engagement isn't quite official without one, a tradition most assume stretches back centuries, when it was, in honest fact, invented in a New York office within living memory. Think about what that means. A stone that isn't especially rare, tied to a slogan written almost as an afterthought, sold through a supply squeeze most people have never heard of, became the single most expected purchase of the most emotional moment in most people's lives. Nobody voted on this tradition. Nobody's grandmother's grandmother demanded it. An agency built it, on purpose, in a matter of decades, and it worked so completely that questioning it now feels almost strange. Last week, we told you about 2 men who built the toothbrush and disappeared from its story. This week is almost the opposite case file. No inventor at all, just an agency, a slogan, and a stockpile, quietly building a tradition so convincing that most people never think to ask where it actually came from. Next week's case file, a metal so precious that entire empires finance themselves by chasing it, and a scientific breakthrough that should have made it worthless overnight. I'm Aidan Thomas. This is Hidden History. Take a look around. History is everywhere.